Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Making Medicine podcast, where science, policy, and innovation meet. As always, I'm your host, John Stanford. We're excited for our official relaunch of the Making Medicine podcast, which will now be offering weekly content across YouTube and social media to keep you updated on current events. There's just too much going on, and we've really listened to our membership and followers that they want more content in easy ways to digest that keeps them up to date on where Washington is impacting your business. We're going to have monthly special guest interviews, Q&A sessions driven by you, on-site coverage at conventions, conferences, and much more. We'll keep you updated every week as we ramp up on content on where you can find it. But for now, you can tune in every Thursday morning right here on our YouTube channel for a brand new episode each and every week. And with that, let's get into the show. There's no doubt that Washington has been solely focused on the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, and now it's law. What's important to take away at the very highest level is it's a huge tax cut and continuation of existing tax cuts. I don't think folks were super aware that the largest tax hike in history was headed our direction if no action was taken. That's why it was critically important for Republicans to act so that they weren't in charge overseeing this huge tax hike. So that's what most of the bill does. There are some specifics we're going to get into, but the easiest thing to think of is it's a continuation of most of the tax policy, as well as some new special tax cuts that are impacting business and individuals. But to pay for those tax cuts, the Trump administration, as well as Republicans in Congress, proposed a lot of ideas, most of which are increasing the deficit. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the bill increases the deficit about $4 trillion, but that doesn't cover all the spending of the tax cuts. So they looked even further, and what there's been a lot of discussion about the negatives of this bill is the nearly $1 trillion hit to America's social safety net, mostly covered by Medicaid. One study suggested that approximately 11 million Americans will lose access to health coverage through the cuts and changes to Medicaid. There's also deep cuts to food assistance programs around the country. There are concerns about impacts to rural health care. While some steps were taken at the last moments to address some of these concerns, the big picture is tax cuts in exchange for an increased deficit and cuts to social safety net, as well as some of the green tax credits that were part of the Biden administration. So what does this all mean for biotech, venture capital, and the folks who call Incubate home? There's no doubt that it's a pro-business bill. Immediate bonus depreciation, which is a fancy way of saying you can deduct everything you spend in the year you spend it, the making permanent of the research and development tax deduction, these are all things that give a green light to American companies to spend more dollars. But there are also some specifics that impact only the biotech community. Most notably is the inclusion of the Orphan Cures Act. This is something Incubate has fought hard for. It addresses one of the fundamental flaws and disincentives of the Inflation Reduction Act. This one in particular made rare disease less attractive for investment by not allowing companies to explore secondary indications at the risk of price controlling their medicines. Many companies reacted to this policy by not looking at something science knows all too well. What works in one part of the body might work in another. So we are really pleased to see the One Big Beautiful Bill solve this problem by allowing additional indications. And I think the industry can celebrate as a whole that we took our first crack at fixing the Inflation Reduction Act. But unfortunately, all of those fixes to the Inflation Reduction Act were not included. Most notably, the EPIC Act, which Incubate joined with dozens of leading venture capitalists and state biotech associations in calling for this reform that would end the pill penalty. That was not included in the bill. There's some hope that it might be addressed later in the year, and Incubate will keep you updated on that. Also not included in the bill was a much ballyhooed cut to pharmacy benefit managers, those PBMs or middlemen that have been very talked about in Washington over recent years. One recent study suggested that 42 cents of every dollar spent on drugs actually goes to these middlemen, and Congress was eyeing them closely as a way to pay for big elements of the beautiful bill. But Ultimately, that was cut out. And so PBMs will live to be challenged another day, as this will continue to be an area of focus of Congress. But addressing PBM reforms was not included in this bill. But sometimes not being included is a win. And that's certainly the case with the most favored nations policy. Incubate worked diligently, including flying in venture capitalists from around the country to meet swiftly with members of Congress to explain that most favored nations, the idea that we would set our prices in country to the prices paid for drugs in price-controlled countries in Europe and Japan, we brought people to Congress to say that would be a death knell to the industry. One study suggested it could cost $1 trillion over the next 10 years should this be implemented. We are pleased to say it did not become part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. And in fact, very little of industry was used to pay for some of these tax credits and tax cuts that the bill pushes forward. We'll still be watching to see if the Trump administration takes any steps towards most favored nation through executive action. But for now, Congress on both sides of the aisle know this is a step too far. Today's episode focused on the One Big Beautiful Bill, but we'll be back next week to talk about the many things that are still in the news and probably on your radar. President Trump's announcement of potentially 200% tariffs on pharmaceutical products over the, quote, next year or year and a half. How's that for uncertainty? We'll also be looking at efforts to save NIH cuts that have been debated in the courts, and we're beginning to gear up for a discussion about what the next FDA should look like, while the current FDA is making strides on AI, changing what phase 1 trials could look like, and so much more. So we'll be covering those in future episodes. That's all for this episode of the Making Medicine podcast. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on the world of policy and innovation. Follow us on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram using the links in the description of this video. And, as always, keep innovating.